Hello and welcome to the AfterParty, Conversations with Spy Party Players. Today I'm joined by Lieutenant Hummus.
Hello, I'm Lieutenant Hummus.
I, are you an official lieutenant?
I wouldn't
Way?
say I'm official. Not really. It's a title I've bestowed upon myself. I'm not quite sure if that's allowed.
Unofficial lieutenant.
Mm,
Does that mean you can
yes.
unofficially promote yourself?
Yeah, I can kind of move up and down the ranks as I need be.
Cool.
I,
Yeah.
I I think that's actually like a big joke. Like whenever I do something stupid in the game, people are like, you're not lieutenant anymore, and and then there's some disagreement over we'll demote you to whatever. And I was like, sure.
Yeah, it like goes down to Private Hummus or
Yeah, I'm Private Hummus now. But that's okay. I'll reset myself soon enough.
it'll catch on. Anyway, so what have you been up to?
Oh man, so I just got back from PAX South a couple days ago, and that was a whirlwind. My goal this year is I want to do every single PAX, and of course they added PAX Unplugged. I don't know if that one counts though, but
Huh.
so
That's
PAX
not the
South was
dev one, is it?
no PAX Dev is the one just before West. So um, yeah, PAX Unplugged. They just announced it like it's the first one this year, and it's focused on board games only. So no computery stuff.
That's cool.
Womp womp.
Oh yeah. I guess yeah. So it's like the main thing I was sort of interested in talking to you about. This is I totally do not plan these at all, so we can t talk about whatever you'd like. But I was like
Sure.
I'm curious because you work professionally as a programmer, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
I've I've professionally for about 8 years now. God, almost 9. What year is it? 2017? Oh my
yes.
god.
Time. What is, oh
I know, god. It's like what is it? 2017 minus 2008, so 9 years. Oh my god.
wow.
Yes. Yeah, 9 years actually in a couple days. I got my first job early March or early February. So, yeah, soon. It'll be
Wow.
exactly 9 years.
Not that much longer than the development of Spy Party.
Yeah, right.
Like your entire career has spanned about the development length of the video game.
Well, it's like, do you remember the Duke Nukem Forever list?
Oh, was that like a list of games
Yeah,
in
it was like, it's less
purgatory?
funny now. Yeah, well, it's less funny now because Duke Nukem actually came out, but it was a list of things that had happened since Duke Nukem Forever was announced. And it was just things like, all the entire Star Wars prequel trilogy was made in less time than it took for, all of the Lord of the Rings movies. It was pretty good. And they even talked about like it took, the Manhattan Project took less time than Duke Nukem Forever has been in development. So it was a pretty comical list.
Yeah,
A little less funny now that it's actually out, though.
yeah. I know. I guess it's a bit of a digression, but like uh, somewhat unfair analogies to make because like okay, like all those existed in specific contexts, and more than likely the truth of the matter with that development was it was just like development hell and kept getting like started and stopped. Um,
Oh yeah, sure. Like I mean, code is hard and games are harder. Like I was doing a side project involving like OpenGL and graphics and stuff. And I'm like, this is the worst. Why does anyone willingly subject themselves to this sort of crap?
mm, mm.
But
Yeah,
so
so
it goes.
like to that point, it's like I've never really talked because I have no experience with computer programming, so I was interested to ask someone who works professionally in the field. Uh, it strikes me whenever I talk to someone who's a programmer that it is a very adversarial environment working with a computer and trying to get it to do anything. That
I
true?
mean, yeah, in a way. Like there's a lot of ways you can look at it. I mean, in one way, it's not adversarial at all. Like the computer will do, you know, precisely what you tell it to do. Now the real challenge though is, kind of learning and figuring out how to, think in the way that the computer wants you to tell it things. There's like lots of different what we call like levels of abstraction. So, the best analogy I've come up for levels, or that I've heard for levels of abstraction, is like this. I can tell you, like, I'm sitting down in a chair right now, and I can say, I'm going to stand up, and you can kind of picture what that looks like, right? If I say I'm standing out of my chair, you can kind of picture that. I can go one level lower of abstraction, which is kind of like another level of detail. So, I can say I'm taking my hands and I'm putting them, on the ends of the armrests, and then I'm pushing down and leaning forward, and kind of raising my waist up. So that would be like the next level down, and then another level down after that is you can start naming like the specific muscles that I'm putting actual numbers on that. Like, does that make sense, or did I just kind of ramble for no reason? Okay.
Yes. So it's like those later ones are the less abstract. They're getting more towards describing concretely what is physically happening.
Yeah, exactly. So as you get kind of lower and lower into, closer to the machine, as they call it, closer to the bare metal, you kind of get into these more detailed abstractions. Like when you're writing like assembly, and C is like maybe another level above that, and then the higher and the higher you go, the less you really have to care about what's going on. Underneath the hood, as it were. So like another example of abstraction is like, a car, right? It has a steering wheel and the gas and the brake and all that. And however, like, I know nothing about, how cars work, but as long as that interface stays the same and I know how to wheel and the gas and the brake, like I can drive any car, right? So that's like a good example of abstraction, because all of the inner workings are abstracted away. But so yeah, back to the original question about being adversarial. Knowing how to be detailed and very specific is a really hard thing to do, because you need to be able to think at the right level of abstraction that you're working with.
Okay. So it just takes like a certain mindset of like not taking in perhaps like human scale interactions where you expect when you're talking to a person that they're going to be able to interpret what you mean. You have to sort of leave those assumptions at the door.
Right, exactly. Like, I mean, the whole reason, computer programming languages were designed were to make it slightly easier for you to tell a computer exactly what you want. Like, you can write anything in, that really low level of abstraction, but it just becomes a huge pain, and you might as well work with something easier.
So then, what's the jump between something like that, like a programming language like C, and something that's object orientated?
Sure. So the kind of lowest level thing that anyone really works with is like assembly. And that's so computers, like a CPU, is really good at executing very simple, discrete things like add these numbers. If the number you added together were greater than 50, then jump to this instruction and start doing things there. Put this in memory, load this from memory, things like that. Like these very simple, very easy things. And then C is like one little layer on top of that. So you write like, then you introduce the concept of variables, and you have functions and things like that, like little bits of code that you can reuse all over the place. But ultimately, when things get compiled and executed, it's like when you compile C, it gets turned into that, assembly, and gets turned into machine code, because that's the only thing a computer truly can understand. When you start talking about object orientation or object-oriented programming, that's like another abstraction on top of that, where you kind of conceptualize things as objects, and you start talking about the relationship that objects have with each other. So like going back to the car example, one important thing about object-oriented programming is the concept of interfaces. So like if I have say a gas-powered car, and it's got again the steering wheel and the gas and the brake, so I would call that the interface. The interface is, I don't care what like, in order for something to be called a car, it has to have a steering wheel, it has to have a gas, and it has to have and then I could have the gas car, which as long as it has the steering wheel, the gas, and the brake, all of the code that it knows how to work with a car will work with that gas car. And then say electric cars come out, and they work totally differently under the surface. But as long as it's got that steering wheel and that gas and the brake, all my code will still work.
Okay, so it's like as far as the user is concerned, it's still functionally the same, even if under the hood, it's working in a completely different manner.
Exactly. You just because the code that works on the car, that calls the car, shouldn't care what goes on underneath the hood. And when you drive, like, you care that you know how to use the car. You don't care, here's how the energy gets from the battery to the motor to the axles to the wheels. You just care that when I hit the gas, it goes, and when I hit the brake, it stops, and the steering wheel seems to operate as it should.
Okay. And so these sort of different approaches to programming, it sort of sounds like they're each useful, but in different circumstances. Like object-oriented programming is probably something more useful for someone like putting a website together where they don't want to worry too much about the details, whereas engaging with something at the machine level or at, say, the level of a language like C++ is something you'd more want to be worried about if you needed specificity.
So not necessarily. So things like C++, have support for object-oriented style design. So you can, like, C is really kind of in a league of its own, where it's like really what we call like procedural code. But then C++ kind of adds, object-oriented design. And I'd say most code written these days, I have no idea how true this is, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say most stuff written these days uses some bits of object oriented, because it was really, really popular for a really long time, and it's a really nice, easy way to think about code, is splitting things up into really small pieces that have kind of nice, discrete ways of working. So like Spy Party is written in C++, and it makes good use of OO. I mean, for the little bits of code I've seen Checker write on stream, there's objects that like represent a game. So it has here's the cast for the game, and here's kind of the state of where all the people are in in the map. The players, and basically that game object just kind of keeps getting updated with say let's see, like statues would be like in that, here's where all the statues are, or what all the statues are. And then when you swap, you just kind of, change that game object. And that's what keeps in sync between the two machines.
Okay. So it's something that it's like object-oriented frameworks is something that can be used in a wide variety of situations. They're not that limited.
Yeah, I mean, you can, like, it just applies so well to so many things. So like I'm trying to think of like a good example. So like, think about like Overwatch, like a college, or yeah, Overwatch is actually a great example. So you would have like a character class, or like an object that represents a character, and it would have certain properties. So this character moves at this speed and turns at this speed, and their weapon does some number of damage. And the code that acts on these characters, it just says, oh, okay, well, I can look up, I know every character does some amount of damage, and it kind of, this is all, it's probably super oversimplified, but, it can look up, oh, yes, I know a character has to do some amount of damage, and it just looks at, that number. It knows, oh, the player pressed, the W key, so how fast should this character move? I know it has to have a move speed because of the nature of its interface, right?
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah, so that way you don't have to write like, if character equals tracer, then move this many. Else if character equals Genji, then move this speed. Else if character equals Bastion, and so on and so on and so on. And then even since you can do all sorts of like really nice things, like say Bastion, has two different move speeds when he's in his what do you call it, the turret position. He has no move speed. He can't move. So when the code that queries, move speed says, well, how fast are you moving? And Bastion's in that sentry state can just say 0. The code that figures out the movement doesn't care. It just says, oh, he doesn't move at all. Okay, great. So it's a really great way of reusing code and making your code kind of fit together nicely with a jigsaw puzzle, or like a jigsaw puzzle, I should say.
And I suppose the larger the project, the more useful abstractions like that become for keeping things manageable.
Yeah, I mean, everything in computers is all about abstractions. Like, I read a great quote. I don't remember the article it was, but it's true. Where basically, my MacBook, that I use for work, there's not a single person on the planet that knows how everything in that thing works. not a single person. So that's why you need all these abstractions to hide details from you that, like the part where you're learning math and or something, your teacher's like, just kind of hand waves an explanation away, like, oh, don't worry about it. This is just kind of the way it is. That's all, the nice parts of abstractions. You can just hand wave some stuff away and you don't have to worry about it for the most part until you do, and then it sucks.
It's like we don't want to confront reality until we have to. It's
Exactly.
Yeah. So where do you work?
So I work at, I'm not going to say the name, but I will say I work at a company that that's okay. But I work at a company that does green energy financing. So for people that want to do, solar panels on houses and stuff like that, we can, loan you money. We calculate, here's how much you could save, and here's all the laws around, what kind of solar panels you can do, and what kind of bonuses and sort of like tax incentives you can get from it as well. And it's not only solar panels, but like energy efficient windows and all sorts of other stuff.
Wow, that's cool. So like what in that sort of an environment, what sort of problems do you deal with as a programmer? Like, what are problems that you work on?
Sure. So the most recent thing I was working on is like forms. So we have to file paperwork with several government entities, and they all have like these forms. And we could pay someone to sit down and fill out all these forms manually, but it would be really convenient because we have customer information and all that stuff to just kind of automatically fill forms in for you. Like, that's the thing. People are expensive, computers are cheap. So the last thing I was doing was a big templating thing for filling out forms to send to governments and contractors and property owners and stuff like that. Before that, it was a lot of math stuff because we have to calculate interest rates and amortization and all sorts of finance stuff that I literally had no idea what it was going into this job. But yeah,
But you learn.
Turns out, yeah, you learn. And it turns out, doing math in a financing company is kind of important.
Oh, I can imagine.
Shocking, I know. Yeah.
That's cool. That's sounds like a very I'd put it that sounds like a very good and useful endeavor what your company is doing. So that's up to you.
Yeah, it does have the the kind of feel good part of it. I mean, before that, I worked at I think, as most people know, I worked at Amazon. I worked on the Kindles, which was totally different, whole of ball wax.
Ooh, and do you want to talk about that? That sounds interesting.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that.
So you worked on the Kindle software?
Yeah, I worked on the, more specifically, and I think all that goodwill that I earned talking about renewable energy, I'm going to lose right now. But
you're atoning.
If you
buy, atoning.
I know, right? Exactly. So the ads that are like on the lock screen of the Kindles, you can pay like an extra bit to disable them. But on the cheaper models, there's ads on lock screen, and that's what I worked on. So all the code that kind of just, some of the code that displays the ads, I worked on, which is way different. The ad industry is a very fascinating place. Like,
yeah, I'm sure there's lots of NDAs around that whole thing.
Yeah, Amazon is they're pretty strict on a lot of the NDAs. I mean, the competition's pretty big. Like, who was it? ZeniMax just sued Oculus and they won what, $500 million for potential trade secret violations. Yeah, some companies take that pretty seriously.
Yeah. So now my next question, I'm almost like not sure if I'm allowed to ask it. I was going to ask like how complicated of a process was it building the ad for the Kindle? Is there like a lot going on to make that happen, or is it a fairly simple thing to put in?
I'll say there's a lot going on because
okay.
We integrate with a lot of stuff. I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay,
so
yeah.
I don't violate.
I was thinking, oh, all right. I'm like assuming from what you just said, this is probably not the sort of thing. Hey, let's go into detail as to what that involves.
Yeah. I mean, so like when you think about like any sort of project, you can start like scaling is always the biggest challenge, I think. So like, one thing I've always said is like anyone, I could build Facebook, in a couple weeks. The challenge is, building Facebook where it can run with, 1.5 billion accounts and millions of people accessing it simultaneously and the whole thing just not totally melting over. Like that's the biggest challenge. Um, it's like Google, great, you can search through lots of text, but can you search through, literal tens of billions of pages in, how long does it take to run a Google search, right? Like, let's see, I'll search for Spy Party right now on Google. It says 0.67 seconds. So, searching tens of billions of, pages in 2/3 of a second that is very impressive,
That's insane.
right?
But then stuff like that would be dependent. I know, like that would be dependent on network connection. But even like having a good network connection, it's still impressive that it's like information that quick.
Right. Well, it's like I'm trying to think of a good way to explain this. So like, let's say you had, I gave you just a bunch of flashcards with words on them, right? Like say millions of flashcards. And I threw them on the floor and I said, okay, go find me the one with the word shoe on it. The only real way to do that is go through them one by one and looking at them. So Google, I don't work at Google. I don't really know much about their infrastructure, but Google has,
But that's
I mean,
good.
not
That
only
because if you did, then you wouldn't be able to tell me.
I wouldn't be able to kind of speculate on this, yeah. Um, so Google, not only has tons of computers at their disposal to all look at things, um, at the same time, because I'm sure my query hits, who knows how many machines. Maybe it's one and they're just really, really clever. But they have really good ways of indexing and storing information. So actually, my card analogy is probably really bad. Imagine, I gave you a textbook, like a physics textbook, and I said, go find me a page about springs. You could kind of flip through it a bit and you'd eventually land on the page about springs. But if you had an index, at the back of the book and you just go look up spring and you find that page, that would be much faster. So Google presume, who knows, but that's those sort of techniques are what make computers fast. All sorts of optimizing ways of storing data and optimizing how you split workload among I'm sure Google has millions of servers, not to mention all the other things they do besides searching lots and lots of text.
Yeah, no. That one you brought up. As with many other users of computer services and games, what that brings to mind to me is that the retrieval of information must be like a really hard process from what you just said. Like, oh yeah, like this thing is having to um, uh, re respond to queries very quickly, um, but also having to troll through potentially massive amounts of information. So like it being able to like quickly retrieve the correct response or piece of information is an impressive feat that I hadn't thought of.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, and like YouTube is like another great example, right? You have
Yeah.
all sorts of video data. Now you can do things like, when videos get really popular, you can kind of predict that. So you can start, what we call caching, which is storing like the most commonly looked up videos. Because, there are some videos that are extremely popular and get, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of views. And then there's, videos where somebody uploads it, gets 5 views and never gets looked at again. So you can kind of optimize your system to, take those things into account. Like if it takes an extra 2 seconds to load up the video that nobody really looks at, who cares, sort of things.
Ah, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm curious if you know much about I don't know if you've like talked to Chris much about this, but like in a game like Spy Party, over the network between the two players, like how much information would need to travel between? Because I assume like the information the sniper's sending to the spy is very minimal. It's like where the camera is positioned and whether a bullet has been fired. Um,
Yeah. So I haven't talked to Chris about it specifically, though I have, played around with, looking at the network traffic as it goes. And you actually kind of answered you asked a question in a really interesting way, and I don't know if you realized you did, because you asked, how much data needs to be sent. And there's kind of a weird philosophical answer to that. Like if I wanted to send you, like, say we're going to meet, to do this interview, and we knew it was going to be a day of the week. Well, how much information do I need to send to you? Like I can type it out, Thursday, which is the day we're recording this, and that's THURSDAY. So that's 8 characters, which is, 8 bytes of information. But I could really get away with, 3 bits of information because it's only 7 possible days, right? So with 3 bits of information, you can encode 8 different values. So, if we'd come up with an encoding scheme, but that's getting besides the point. I don't know. You just reminded me. So that's called, if you're interested in data entropy, go look it up. Anyway, so I looked a little bit at the data. So, basically what you said is more or less right. The sniper is constantly sending, positioning information or camera position information. The spy is sending a lot more data. I haven't decoded it all. It's all, I assume, some changes to in-game structures, that big game object I was telling you, or we were talking about earlier. So it's probably just changes to that to make sure the game is synced up on both ends. And then when the shot comes off, dump the rest of it, because I don't believe it sends, this is the spy. That's the whole, waiting for game results thing at the very end.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess one of the other things is it's not just, I would assume the spy sending information to the sniper. It's also the game state itself is separate to both, I would assume, and that feels like would be the main sort of bulk of traffic being sent to the sniper is just what state all of the other guests are in.
Yeah, so you don't actually need to send. Now, I don't know if this is the way it happens, but I imagine, it's probably somewhat like this. So you don't really need to send this, the whole state every single time. You really just need to send the initial state, and then for every update you send, here's what's different between the last, between the last state you had and the new state. So you don't need to send the same, say on Ballroom, you don't need to say the statues are still, head, Venus, head, Venus. You can say the statues haven't changed. The statue hasn't changed. Oh, this statue changed,
Okay.
So you can just send what we call the deltas, or the differences.
So wait, it is I've heard the word seed used before. Is that what a seed is? A state of data that you then
Kind of. So a seed is generally, when you're talking about seeds, you're talking about random number generators. So a random number generator, so computers, since they execute instructions very, very specifically, generating a randomness is impossible because they just follow a completely deterministic set of instructions. So you need some sort of outside input in order to generate what we call truly random numbers. Now you can fake it pretty well without any sort of external input, but to get what we call good cryptographically secure random numbers, you need some sort of initial state. And even most pseudo random number generators have initial seed, an initial state to set things off as well. So it's just, it's kind of related to that, where it's the initial kind of state of the machine, or whatever. I say machine it's the random number generation machine, but that's kind of what it is.
Mm-hmm.
If you picture a small random number generator, the seed is kind of the state of the whole thing.
Okay, so it's the
initial.
Yeah. Right. So so it's a reference point that you can then measure differences from.
Kind of. So let's see. So there's a method of generating random numbers. I wish I could remember what it was called, but now this is a really bad way of generating random numbers. But if I had just a calculator with me, this is how I would do it. So generate make up a 10-digit number, then square it, and then take the middle 10 digits of your new number and then that's like the next random number, and then if you wanted another one after that, square that number, take the middle 10 digits, and you can keep doing that as many times as you want. But that initial number that you started with is what we would call the seed. It's where the whole thing started. So if you start with that same seed number again, you'll generate the same random numbers over and over again.
Oh, okay. Now, all right. Yes, I think that makes more sense now.
Okay,
That was
good.
That was a good that was a good explanation. Thank you.
Yes, no problem.
Uh, yeah. Wait. Sorry. At the beginning, you were mentioning PAX, and I didn't ask you about that. How was PAX South? What did you get up to over the weekend?
Oh yeah, we'll bring it all the way around.
Yeah.
PAX South, yeah, PAX. It was great. I had a great time. I mean, I always love going to PAX. Forgotten Tune and I think the big thing was we entered the Keep Talking Nobody Explodes tournament, which we won for the second year in a row.
Oh,
So that was nice. Got my medal sitting right here. I'll tap it on the mic for you to edit out later.
Nice. That is not getting
Yeah, it says,
edited out.
oh, good. So that was a good highlight. I ran Johann Sebastian Joust, which I always love doing. Saw a couple cool indie games on the floor that I enjoyed. Probably the most interesting, actually there are two interesting ones, but they're both like kind of related. The first one was called, was it a dual hand disaster, DUEL hand disaster. And it was kind of interesting. Like you play it with the game like an Xbox 360 controller, and the game is split screen, and you're meant to play it by yourself. You're not supposed to play it co-op, though I suppose you could if you really wanted to. And the left side of the screen is kind of a Space Invader style, game, like a top-down 2D game, and then the right-hand side. Oh, my Alexa heard me. Hold on, let me mute that. And the computers, right? And the right-hand side of the screen is kind of this. You're controlling a spaceship trying to pick up resources while dodging enemies. And the two, so you're supposed to play them at the same time. Like the left side of the controller controls the left side of the game, and the right side of the controller controls the right side of the game, and they kind of interact. Like any enemy that you let through on the left side will show up on the right side to make that side harder. And then the objects you pick up on the right side can make your weapons on the left side, more powerful. So, and you're trying to, keep track of two games at once, and it was really fun. It was quite enjoyable. It's not out yet, but I enjoyed that. The other one I played was called Semispheres. I can't remember if it's hemispheres or semispheres, but I think it's
knowing
Semisphere.
pun names, it's probably Semispheres.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's Semispheres. Yeah, it's Semispheres. Found the game. So it's a puzzle game where, again, like the screen's split in half. And the left-hand side of the controller controls the left side, and the right-hand side of the controller controls the right. But you're kind of like this little dot, and you're trying to move. Like each level is basically a maze that you're trying to move through. And there's like enemies you have to kind of sneak around, and the dot on the other side, there's ways to interact between the two, and you try to make it all the way to the kind of end. And it was really fun. I only played a couple levels because it was a pretty short demo, but I enjoyed it. It was really cool. I like the concept.
Cool. Yeah, with Joust, you bring that like pretty much to every PAX, don't you? Like you set up a full like 18 player. Is it 18?
It's 8. 8 players is the max I have. There are this is like an official build that the dev has that I would love to get my hands on that supports more than 8 players, but
oh right, but to do that you have to hook up multiple machines because there's like a limit to how many Bluetooth signals you can run on one.
Yeah, like each Bluetooth adapter is technically limited to 8 devices, with a Bluetooth adapter counting as one. I have no idea why my laptop can support 8 devices plus the adapter itself. I have no idea, but like literally that's the only reason I still have that really old laptop is because for some reason it supports it.
And like later models don't?
Yeah, for some reason my work laptop will only do the standard 7. I have no idea why, but so it goes. There's an open source implementation I've been playing with that actually somebody mentioned it to me a couple days ago that supposedly supports 18 players on a Raspberry Pi with like 3 Bluetooth adapters. So we'll see how well that works.
Yeah, it was sad to me when it came out that they said they were going to try and get it to run on Windows, but apparently even now Windows interfacing with Bluetooth signals is like really scattershot or unreliable.
Yeah, I mean, there's just like a lot of like Bluetooth. The Bluetooth stack I've heard on Windows is not great, and then the PS Move, right, is totally undocumented, I'm sure. So it's all been reverse engineered, and you know, most like what's really scary when you start to learn how to program is you realize how much of the code you use every day is held together with baling wire and string, because computers are so hard. So you're just like, yeah, this kind of works. It's good enough, and now it's running on your computer.
Yeah, it I guess that's one of those things where uh like as um computers become more pervasive in like larger scale infrastructure, things like self-driving cars and writing tax forms, that like might be a concern of like if we can't like get like are these things reliable enough to use in large scale infrastructure if you say they're held together by baling wire and duct tape? Like is it something to be
Yeah,
worried about?
I wouldn't say like it's something to be worried about. It's just, like I mean it works, but a lot of people like when you write code in school, or like so you're learning to write code, you kind of have this like idealistic way. Like, I talked about, object-oriented programming, and you're like, I'm gonna design all these objects and everything's gonna be beautiful and you know, everything's great. And then you kind of get to the real world and things you have to like compromise because you really need this code to ship, so you kind of put in a dirty little hack somewhere that violates that beautiful abstraction you made. And the world's just kind of full of those. That being said, I totally am awaiting the day when there are no more human driven cars on the road. I am all for that day.
Yeah, it's gonna be an interesting on many axes. It's gonna be a really interesting 10 to 20 years. Like what happens?
It is, and I think it's going to come quicker because, like the thing that a lot of people like. I was talking with a friend of mine, and he's like, "Oh, I mean, he's right because he says, the first accident, that a self-driving car gets into is going to be a huge deal, right? Like it's going to be a big thing. Like I don't think there's been a major accident. I think there's like one or two, minor fender benders or whatever. But like the first like big accident is really going to be a big deal. But the thing is, for it to really be worth it on like the big kind of economic sense, self-driving cars don't have to be perfect. They just have to be better than people, and that's not a high bar to jump over. Like people are bad at driving. And actually, if you want a great book on the subject, there's a book I read. It's probably pretty old now, but it's by a guy named Tom Vanderbilt, and it's called "Traffic: Why We Drive the Way We Do and What It Says About Us." And it's a pretty good read about driving and why it is so damn hard.
Ah, cool. It sounds like a good read. Yeah, the one of the like dilemmas that I hear brought up a lot is um one of those like philosophical situations where it's like, oh, like if the car is given like two options of like either killing an
Right.
innocent pedestrian or the driver, like what do you program it to do? What do you make its priorities?
Right, and I mean, and those are decisions that have to be made, and it's kind of funny. Like people have been polled about that, and everyone's like, "Oh, it should kill the driver," unless you phrase the question, "You are in a self-driving car," in which case it means like, "No,
Yeah.
well, it shouldn't kill the driver," Or I guess I used the word driver
Yeah, it's like, are you
wrongly,
the
but
pedestrian
yeah,
or the occupant?
exactly. I mean, and those are kind of the decisions we have to, or we will have to make.
Yeah, so
But
so, so really it's less a question of like uh what is the code doing, and more a question of like what are the like legislative changes or rethinks that you have to make in a situation where um the occupant is not liable? Like how does that change insurance and how does that change
right,
um
exactly. Like, will it be the pedestrian's fault? Is it the car manufacturer's fault? Is it, the road designer's fault because they made a road that, computers can, there's a lot of arguments you can make. And I don't think it's ever really been tested in courts, at least not in the United States. But I know some states have laws that are really cool about self-driving cars, and some states less so. Though I think the first place where self-driving cars are really going to come in is going to be like long haul trucking is going to be the first target, because that is like the cost of your consumer goods. A big chunk of that is, well, you had to pay someone to drive it from, the port where it landed in the country to, the store where you bought it, and that is expensive. And humans can't drive 24/7 like computers can. So you know and you don't have to pay computers nearly as much as you pay humans. So
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's going to be the first one.
And then this we don't have to talk about this because like serious dark topic, but then it gets into the whole question of like the like economic threat of mass automation and how do we restructure economies where we can't where we're like cutting out a huge amount of the work.
Right, yeah. I mean, it's going to happen as computers do more and more things. Like, yeah, it's something I don't have a great solution for. Um, but, part of being a programmer is you basically unemploy people. Like it sucks to feel it like that. Like it kind of is, it's a shitty way to look at it, but that's kind of what happens, right? Like I wrote something that could fill in forms really quickly, but, you know, before that, what would have the solution been? Pay somebody to sit there and fill them in by hand.
Yeah, yeah, and like this is perhaps my perspective. Others may agree disagree, but I think in situations where someone is building a product or a piece of technology, I don't think a person who builds something is like directly liable for the ramifications of it, because like larger economies are so complicated that like you have many things that contribute and affect an economy, and so I don't think it's fair for people to feel like guilty or liable when they like build something that makes someone else unemployable. But it is like a responsibility of governments and institutions to like respond to changes and ask themselves, okay, like this is where like our system is moving towards because of like capitalist pressures or whatnot. And so we need to take seriously what do we do in response to this.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's just, the big philosophical discussion of, how do we deal with,
Mm,
somebody's been a truck driver for so long and now all of a sudden they can't be. That is a hard problem to solve.
yeah. Sorry, I took this in a
No,
really
no, that's
serious
good.
direction. Like, let's talk about mass unemployment.
Yeah.
Um,
Let's talk about the future of the world.
yeah. Let's not like let's
Let's not.
actually let's talk about a potentially fun bit of world. So you were saying this year you want to try and do every PAX.
Yeah, for a long time I wanted to do what I called the four PAX Grand Slam, which is go to all four PAXs in a year. So I did three last year. I did West, East, and South. So this year I'm gonna hopefully add Australia to the mix.
Well, that one's going to leave you very sleep deprived. So I'd recommend landing
Ah,
like a couple days before the event. Um,
yeah, I
sleep.
mean, so that's my plan. Uh, I've never been to Australia, so I figured if I'm flying, all the way around the world, I might as well spend, not just PAX there and go see the rest of the country.
Yay. Well, if you ever travel around the West Coast, we should catch up in Perth.
Yeah, I mean, the conventions in Melbourne, I want to see Sydney. I don't know where Perth is relative to all of that.
Okay, Australia's kind of weird. So uh, you know how in like how in the States like have most people live along the coastline and then
Hmm.
okay, so imagine that, but it's like 96% of the population is living on the coast in urban
Right.
centers. Yeah, just because of how like uninhabitable vast amount of Australia is. So West Australia, as a state, is like the entire west coast. It's just like the west third of the country is one state, and
Right.
Perth, the state capital, is just like this tiny city down the southwest corner. But it's
Okay.
nice.
And then
Nice.
nice. And then Melbourne's like kind of, I know it's on the eastern side, and Sydney too, right?
Yeah, yeah. So get this right. So along the east coast, so So there's like sort of in the middle are like North and South states, territory, and South Australia, and then on the east coast, there's Queensland towards the top. So that's about it's the like top right sixth of the country, and then there's New South Wales where Sydney is, and then there's Victoria on the southeast corner. And
Okay.
then this really funny thing about when Australia federated. So Sydney and Melbourne were trying to fight for being the national capital,
Right.
and the federal government, because they couldn't deal with the two like bickering with each other, just decided, fuck it, we're just gonna like directly halfway between the two of you, we're just gonna make that a like city state territory, and so the national capital is called the Australian Capital Territory, and this is like a city where the federal parliament building is,
hmm
just halfway between those two cities, like make neither of them happy.
So wait, is it like its own? So it's not part of like a Australian state. It's like its own little thing.
Oh no. So it's a state, but it's just like a state for this one city to have the national capital instead of having it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, instead of making Sydney or Melbourne the national capital, they just like built a new city between the two of them and made that its own state. Like
Oh, so it's
yeah,
like
but like a state within the federation, not like a separate nation state.
okay, so it's not you wouldn't say like it's in so it's not like in New South Wales or in Queensland or in
No,
Victoria or
no.
anything like that.
So it
Right.
yeah it's a
Okay. Yeah.
separate,
So we do
separate
this.
state to
We
this.
have a similar thing in the states, and
Yeah, it is.
boy,
Is that how DC works?
yeah. So DC is not in a state. It's not in a state at all. It's just like the District of Columbia. It's its own little district in that kind of like weird intersection, and yeah, not a state, which has like all sorts of weird ramifications um, in our federal government, and it is very silly. There's a big push for DC to be its own state. With very, I mean, obviously it hasn't been successful yet, but it kind of comes up every once in a while.
Yeah.
Mostly if you live there. I live on the opposite side of the country, so
Mind you do
you
live
know.
in a place called Washington.
I do live in Washington
That
State.
was
That is
confusing
true.
to me, like showing how like little I knew about the states. I didn't realize that like Washington and Washington DC were the name of separate places. I thought Washington was the name of the state, and that's where Washington DC was. Um,
Yeah, that is yeah. Like you're not the only one to do that. Like a lot of people, I think, underestimate how the size of the United States. Like you always hear stories of like people coming from like the UK, and they're like, "Oh, we're in New York City, and then we'll just drive over to LA." It's like, well, that's gonna take you like a week long to drive. Like US is a pretty big place.
no, my aunt and uncle traveled over here from Vancouver, and they made the same assumption of Australia, thinking, oh yeah, like we'll land in Perth and then we'll like drive across to the east coast, and it's like you're gonna be going through desert for like a, like 2 weeks if you want to do that, like a week. So yeah, like
Can you do that? Like I know the middle of Australia, like I mean, like you said, the coasts are where the big population centers are, and the middle is the vast. I guess everyone else in the world sees it as the vast area filled with animals that will kill you. Um, but can you like, are there actually roads that kind of go through and like petrol
um,
stations and everything that like the infrastructure that you would need to do that?
well there are, but it's sparse. Like
hmm
it's like in the states where you have agriculture land, and like you do have cities in the middle of, of the states. I mean, like how densely populated are like towns in Middle America? Like, what percentage of the population do you think like uh, is in not the the borders, the coastline? Is
I
it
don't know. It's pretty
still a
heavy.
sizable chunk?
Oh yeah, I mean it's still a sizable chunk. It's just it's kind of weird. I heard this tip from I wish I remember, but like if you're going to drive across the United States, like if you're going to drive from one side to the other, definitely do it going east to west. Definitely go from the East Coast to West Coast, because it's like you start in the super dense, East Coast, and then the population kind of slowly becomes less and less dense as you get, closer and closer to the middle of the country, and then you just kind of hit this point near the West Coast where just everything springs back up again. So like basically once you hit like more or less the Rocky Mountains, but like everything in the middle is just nothing. But like Ohio has a lot of people in it. And that's
Okay.
kind of in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, so that part you mentioned where it's basically nothing, that's just the middle of Australia.
Okay.
So you can travel across. There are like some railway lines like that. There's no, I don't think, road that just like goes from one coast to the other, but you can travel across. Like the more common thing is sort of go along the coastline.
Right.
Just because it's a nicer experience, and if you like break down, you're not going to die.
Right. A definite benefit. Actually, speaking of driving in Australia, I have a question for you.
Left side of the road.
As Oh, I know that. Oh man, when I was in Japan, that was very weird. Like, because everything was swapped. Like, I was like walking on the right side of the sidewalk, and it's like, no, you don't do that, and it's really hard to adjust. But so I was watching this show called oh, I don't remember. I just stumbled upon it on YouTube. But basically, the show Cops.
Yeah.
So it's basically the TV show Cops, but it's literally just them busting people for drunk driving. Like the like it was like literally the whole show is like drunk driving, them pulling people over, and they always made mention of these things called P plates, and I have no idea what those are.
Oh yeah, so that's just our like provisional license. So
Okay.
yeah. So our like license system, when you start out, so you can like apply for your learner's permit or your L plates when you're 16.
Mm-hmm.
While you're on that like log of I think 50 practice hours or so, but when you're on your L plates, you need a certified driver in the car with you at all times. Then after that, you go for a test for your provisional license, your plates. On that, I think. So you have like two sets of plates. There's like red plates where you're not allowed to have any alcohol in your system and you can't be out after midnight for 6 months. And then your green plates, I think there's like a small tolerance for alcohol in your system and no curfew for another 18 months, and then you can get your full license. So do you guys have like
is it like
learner's plate system?
Kind of. So like when you say plates, like you're talking about like the actual license plate that goes on the car?
No. So it
okay, yeah.
Just like square
just like the
you
license
like
or whatever
put
you have.
Put in the car like an interior that says like P.
Oh, you actually
L.
like hang it on your.
Yeah.
Oh no, we don't have that. No, so it's different state by state. But so I grew up in California, and the way it worked when I grew up is at 15, you can get your learner's permit. So actually, I think, God, oh my God, I'm so old. But the way I remember it working was you had to, at 15, you could take like a driver's ed class where they like, you sit down in the classroom and they kind of teach you like, here are the laws and here's how you don't kill anyone. And then once you've passed that, you can get your learner's permit. You can do that at 15. And when you have that, it's got the same idea, like, zero tolerance for alcohol. You can't drive, you have a curfew, and you have to have a fully licensed driver, at least 18, in the car at all times.
Okay.
And then you also have to take, I think, a certain number of hours of, hands-on instruction with, somebody else who's like certified to teach you, in the car. So I had to do it over like 3 different, I think just like 6 hours, and I did like, 3 sessions of 2 hours each. And then if you pass all those, then at 16, you can get your full driver's license, but you're still, zero tolerance for alcohol. You can't have, for the first 6 months, you couldn't have anyone else in the car. Like it could only be you. And then for the first, or adults.
Like you could have someone in the car so long as they had a license?
Yeah, pretty much. So like you couldn't, the first person, in your group of friends to get a license is driving all
yeah, yeah.
your friends around. You can't do that, and there's a curfew associated with that too for the first year.
Yeah,
So that's the way it worked.
but for your learner's permit period, there's no need for like demarcation inside the car to say, hey, this person is a learner's driver.
Nope, not at
Okay.
all.
Yeah, because a like interesting consequence you get of that is, and I don't know how much of this is like measurably true and how much of it is just like sub, subjective bias, but like you get the feeling that people like judge you differently if you have like learner's plate or a P plate in your car. Like,
Oh, I'm sure. Like, so in that like hands-on driving part I was talking about,
mhm.
you usually do it in like the school's car, and like they have the whatever driving school and the big
Oh
thing on
yeah,
top.
yeah,
So in those situations, yeah, people definitely know, and it's really funny too. I'm sure they have these when you're learning to drive in Australia, but the instructors, you're driving, and the instructor's sitting next to you in the passenger seat, and they have their own brake pedal. So like if
yeah,
you're about to do something like really stupid, they can slam on the brakes for you.
yeah. When I like auto first and then let manual after that, and
Hmm.
found it really helpful getting lessons in a in instructor's manual car because since they had separate brakes, accelerator, and clutch pedal, they were able to
Hmm.
like really ease you into things. It was like, okay, just worry about steering now, just worry about steering and changing gears, and now worry about the clutch. So like um, r- rather than like your parents having the nightmare of like letting you destroy their gearbox. Like,
Oh
okay,
yeah.
here's like warm up on that, and then I'll take the risk of letting you into the car.
Oh yeah, I've definitely stalled my dad's car once or twice when I was learning him to drive. Probably way more than once or twice, but yeah. God, now that you mention it, I haven't driven so I don't own a car, so I don't drive all that much anyway, but
Well,
um
you live in a city with
yeah,
good
I live in a city, so it's
metro
fine.
bus.
Yeah. But like I was just thinking like, man, I have not actually driven a manual car in many, many, many years.
Well, they're probably going the way of extinction now. Like auto cars are more and more common, and soon auto cars. Will be.
Yeah, right. Like I said, I mean I hate driving too, so I'm excited for the day. Like, oh man, when auto driving cars come out, then I think like a lot of things will change very, very quickly. Like
Yeah,
intersections will be totally different, and why bother owning a car when you could have like some sort of Uber-like service just come pick you up, right? No matter where you are, because
mm,
the longest time where cars spend most of their lives parked. So that seems like a waste.
yeah. It's I'm kind of nervous about it as so I ride a bicycle,
Hmm.
um, but
Hey,
like
no, I'm all for that.
uh that's something I'll have to get used to is like that weird feeling of like, oh, okay, like surrounded by all these like automatic machines that like could kill me, like, and like I guess it's not really any different from like a person being in control. Like, okay, this person could kill me if they made a mistake, but the fact that it's not a person makes it um somewhat stranger. That makes sense. Like this autonomous
Yeah,
machine could just run me over if there was um some uh some glitch or some error. It's like a
yeah,
strange thing
like
to get used to.
yeah, it is weird. Like I kind of I get that feeling a little bit, but I don't really like planes are like a great example. Like most, except for basically taking off and landing, when you fly on a jet, most of it's just autopilot, right? So,
Well,
and they always have backups and stuff.
yeah. Well, there's a lot of contextual decision making that um like
I guess it's true that
require
cars have
like
to make that planes
conscious
don't.
um decision making. But yeah, I guess that's an analogous situation that okay, there's like a whole bunch of like um automated processes that you're sort of like trusting to work, and if those didn't, then the plane would crash and would then be in a would feel like air crash investigators episode.
Right, yeah, exactly. They talk
Like,
about you on
why did these people die? Well, it was one. That's
Hey, that has definitely happened before. Was it Alaska Flight 2 something or other back, I want to say the early 2000s. It was a flight from Puerto Vallarta, Mexico to either like San Francisco or Seattle or something like that. And one of the screws that controlled the rudder it wasn't loose, but it was like worn or threaded badly or something like that. And pilot lost control. It was bad times.
Wow.
I think we're veering into dark territory.
Yeah, like we've been talking for an hour. Do you want to call it that? Fun conversation.
I mean, I can talk for a while. I mean, unless you want to cut it.
Well, no, since I've got work this afternoon.
Oh, that's
Sorry,
right. Yeah, I'm like, oh, it's the
be
afternoon. I can
party
just talk.
pooper.
That's okay. No, this is good.
No, this is really fun. Think the shooting the shit. This is cool.
Yeah, no, this is good. This is good. Yeah, I think we covered quite a few topics.
Yeah. We talked about automation and writing tax form software and all sorts of cool things. So
Yeah.
when is the next PAX that you're attending? Would that be Prime West?
No, the next one's East in a couple weeks. It's March 10 through 12th in Boston, Massachusetts.
Ooh. So if anyone's wanting to play some Johann Sebastian Joust, they should head on down if they're like able to get there.
Yeah, I mean, if you're able to get there, I mean, you can follow me on Twitter. I always announce where and when I'm setting up when I do. And East, I think, is the primo PAX for jousting. At least, maybe Australia's better. I haven't been to it yet, but the location I had last year was excellent because it's always like this. I don't like it's not an official PAX thing. I just kind of bring my stuff and set up wherever and just kind of go for it. So I kind of like the guerrilla style of it all.
Yeah. Oh, right on. Cool. Well, I guess I'll see you some. Sorry, like I should really think of an outro for this. Instead of just saying like, "Well, see ya, hang up."
That's okay.
Yeah.
Till next time, I guess.
Yes. Until next time. So
Same after party time, same after party place.
yes. Perfect. All right. Thanks, Summer.
All right, take it easy.